Hello, it's almost 8:30 here in Singapore. Good morning. You're watching Asia First.
And here are the headlines we're following. Iran denies asking the U.S. for a ceasefire, saying it's ready for a prolonged war. President Donald Trump's appeal to countries to send warships to keep the Strait of Hormuz open and safe brings no commitments.
The American leaders told the Financial Times in an interview that he could delay his summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping later this month as he presses Beijing to help unblock the crucial waterway.
And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has spoken to President Trump about ending the disruption to shipping, and their talks are due to continue today. While India says negotiations with Iran have helped secure safe passage for some of its vessels.
Oil prices falling from early session gains in Asia trade as the U.S. bombs dozens of targets on Karg Island. That's Iran's main oil hub, heightening risks to supply across the Middle East. The International Energy Agency says oil from an unprecedented stockpile release will be made available immediately in Asia, while barrels for Europe and the Americas will not arrive until the end of this month.
And air defense systems activated across the Gulf as several countries report intercepting missiles and drones, while governments repeatedly call for de-escalation and diplomatic negotiations between the main parties involved in the conflict.
Well, let's get some insight from Simon Pratt, who's Senior Lecturer, Political Science at the University of Melbourne right now. Good to see you, Simon. Thank you for speaking with us. Just want to get your reaction to the U.S. wanting other major economies to help secure the Strait of Hormuz, the latest being President Donald Trump signaling he could delay his summit with President Xi Jinping later this month in order to pressure China more. How effective, Simon, is this strategy, and what dilemma does this create for countries that Trump's courting in terms of energy security and being drawn into confrontation?
So Iran's ability to control or close the Strait of Hormuz is its one ace in the hole, so to speak. I don't think there's really any situation in which Iran relinquishes that ace, in which Iran allows extensive shipping to pass through the strait unless the war in general is over. I mean, the Iranian regime is fighting for its survival here. And so I'm just not sure there are any diplomatic or economic instruments that, say, China could use to get Iran to change course on this, unless it were part of a comprehensive and secure, longer lasting end to the war in general. So if I were, and I don't see that coming anytime soon. So I think if I were, say, in Asia and my country were heavily dependent on oil supplies transiting the strait, I would be alarmed, and I would look for alternative supplies or to deal with the financial and economic fallout for the near future, at least.
Okay. So, Simon, so far there are no firm commitments. But which countries would be most likely to participate? And if the U.S. can't assemble a strong sort of maritime coalition, what does that signal about American influence right now?
Well, I think that many countries are reluctant to get involved in this war. I think, say, unlike previous U.S.-led military adventures in the Middle East and the Gulf, I think this is really seen as an American and an Israeli circus that others do not really want to join. I have seen some discussion of a joint EU-UN maritime task force that could try to create safe passage. But something to remember as well is that Iran's ability to discriminate between which ships it strikes in the strait is also dependent on its actually having a certain threshold of military capacity. So the more damaged Iran becomes, the less discriminating it's going to be in what it fires on. I think it would take a significant naval deployment to open the strait without Iran's consent.
And President Trump says that Iran may want a deal, but the terms on the table aren't good enough. Given the shifting rhetoric we heard from Washington, from regime change to nuclear rollback to weakening Iran's military, what does Washington actually want to achieve before it considers a deal?
I am not sure that Washington is coherent or unified in the objectives that it has for this war. Initially, it seemed as though the objective was regime change, but that this objective is not achievable, and no one really thinks it's achievable. And so the objectives have since changed to eroding or attriting Iran's military. It's no longer possible, or it never really was possible, to gain control of Iran's highly enriched uranium. So that's off the table. Local democratic protests haven't materialized. So that's off the table. Kurdish forces conducting a ground operation also seems to be off the table. At this point, it seems like the US is just looking for a way to save face and exit, but I'm not sure Iran will give that to them. So, to put it briefly, I don't really know what Washington wants because it keeps changing.
How about Tehran's perspective? I mean, what would a deal need to include for Tehran to seriously consider ending this conflict? And do you think there's a realistic path back to negotiations?
So, I mean, the Iranian regime faces the same dilemma that Ukraine does, which is that a ceasefire now isn't a credible promise that the war won't resume in a year, right? So Iran is in a position where whatever ceasefire they agree to needs to involve a pretty significant set of material guarantees and perhaps even reparations that would sort of compensate it for the heavy cost that it has paid in this war, and to offer some real commitments that the US and Israel won't simply resume fighting once it has had a time to, say, replenish interceptor magazines and figure out exactly how to try again. So I think the things that Iran wants don't currently appear to be anything that Washington and Israel are prepared to provide, and vice versa.
Simon, I think it's timely we touch on Israel as well. Their military campaign in Lebanon, for example, it's escalating rapidly. There are parallels to Gaza there. What does that signal about Israel's broader strategic objectives at this stage of the war?
Of course, Israel would have assumed that Hezbollah would have joined the fighting on behalf of Iran once operations began. Hezbollah is a very close ally and in some ways proxy for the Iranian regime. I think Israel was a little surprised at how well Hezbollah has rearmed and the degree to which they are capable of sort of launching serious and threatening barrages at Israel. So Israel seems to be taking the opportunity to really destroy or at least seriously degrade, maybe even finish the job that was mostly finished but not fully in the last round of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. And this explains the heavy Israeli airstrikes, not just on the south of Lebanon, but on Beirut itself. I do think that one question for me is whether Israel will pursue some sort of peace agreement with the Lebanese government that involves more decisive action by the Lebanese government against Hezbollah within its territory.
So, Simon, if neither side is willing to compromise and this becomes a war of attrition, I wonder which side actually has a higher threshold for pain here. Is it Iran or the U.S.-Israeli side?
Well, given that the Iranian regime is fighting for its life, I would say it probably has a higher tolerance for pain and paying costs, right? Because the alternative to Iran paying these costs, or at least the regime paying these costs, is that it ceases to exist. Whereas, so Israel is also willing to pay costs here, and this is, of course, because Israel and Iran have been locked in a war for a very long time, either a cold war or a hot one. So from the perspective of Israelis, the pain that they experience now is very important for their security. The U.S., however, which is an essential partner in this war, obviously, I would say the U.S. threshold for pain and cost here is much lower, because again, it's not really clear what the U.S. is getting in the first place, and so why pay these costs in an ongoing way? This is why I think that if this war comes to an end, it will be because the U.S. seeks an exit, one that allows them to save face or get something limited out of it, and to justify the enormous cost in wealth and in American and allied lives.
And Simon, your reaction to a development over the weekend involving Hamas, which is closely aligned with Iran. It's urging Tehran not to target neighboring countries while still backing its right to retaliate. What do you read into that message, and what does it reveal about concerns over a wider regional war?
I mean, Hamas and Iran have been allies of convenience But that does not mean that Hamas wants a region in military crisis. Also, Hamas probably feels as though a region in military crisis sets back the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip on everyone's priority list and makes it much harder for them to sort of try to re-legitimize as a political actor and to play a continued role in the future of the Gaza Strip. So from Hamas's perspective, a war between Israel and Iran is fine, but a war that reconfigures the agendas and priorities of all Middle Eastern countries away from Palestine, that's not fine at all. And so they're interested in just containing things.
Okay, thank you so much for speaking with us this Monday morning. Simon Pratt, Senior Lecturer of Political Science at the University of Melbourne.